Hi everybody, I'm Dave Bogart, President of the Bloomfield Historical Society, and we are back today with another oral history interview. And we are very fortunate to have with us John Marshall today. And pardon the longish introduction, but I'd like to give the viewers a sense of your extensive involvement in our local history community. John is the Bloomfield area's preeminent local historian. It can't be overstated how much John has contributed to our understanding of Bloomfield's history. John and his wife Nancy moved to Bloomfield Township in 1975 and raised their daughters Julie and Karen here, and John had a successful career at Ford and IBM. John was a founding member of the Bloomfield Historical Society and Preservation Bloomfield, and he's been the program chair for the Bloomfield Historical Society's local history program, which now numbers 65 presentations that we've done. John has also researched the history of over 200 homes in the Bloomfield area and presented his findings on our website and in print. And he is our go-to historian when questions are submitted to the Bloomfield Historical Society. John was very involved with the preservation of the Benjamin Barton House and Craig Log Cabin, which were moved to the Bowers School Farm. And John and I have spent many hours, along with some other volunteers, restoring the Craig Log Cabin and doing other work at the Bowers School Farm on the two buildings. So that was a bit of a long introduction, but welcome, John. It's great to have you here today. There's so much.
Pleasure.
There's so much to talk about. So we're going to have to go over the highlights because we could be here for 20 hours probably discussing everything. So why don't you start by telling us about your early life in Monroe, Michigan, and how you found your way to Bloomfield Township?
Okay, I was born in, believe it or not, Washington, D.C., even though my parents were both from Monroe. This was before the war, before Pearl Harbor, and that. My dad had a job with the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C., and that's where I was born. They were living there. But a year and a half later, after Pearl Harbor, my mother moved back to Monroe with me, lived in my grandfather's house, and my dad went into active service. The house that we moved into was built in 1865 by my great-grandfather, about 4 blocks from downtown Monroe. It's very good for us growing up. And I lived there until I was 18 years old, when I went off to Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan, where I studied mathematics, got a bachelor's degree there, and was hired by IBM right out of school, which is handy. And I started working for them up in Flint branch office, and with a sub-office in Saginaw, which they assigned me to work at. And that's where, when working on an account up in Saginaw, I met my wife, late wife Nancy, who was, believe it or not, the secretary to the data processing manager. So once we started dating, they had to find her a new job because it didn't seem like a conflict of interest of some sort. But it all worked out fine. We were married in 1963, had the 2 daughters, Karen and Julie, about 11 months apart. And are we going to get to how I get to?
You found your house in
Bloomfield Township? We lived in Saginaw for about 10 years as a family, and then I got a promotion. I thought it was to Chicago to be in the education center there, a supervisor in the regional education center. We sold our house, moved over to Wheaton, Illinois, where we spent 2.5 years. My wife loved it, but I didn't like it very much. And we decided to come back to Michigan and locate ourselves somewhere midway between, not midway, or at least between Saginaw, where her family was, and Monroe, where my parents still lived in the old Schmidt homestead. And so we settled on Bloomfield because I had some experience there, having lived in there for a 8 weeks on Cottontail Lane near Gilbert Lake Road with a friend of mine's mother when I was in IBM training back in the very early days in 1962. So we settled on Bloomfield. I bought a house for exactly the same amount as I sold my house in Wheaton. And I didn't really plan it this way, but the house is between 2 historic homes in Bloomfield. One many of you probably know about, the Adams Castle. These are both in the area that's north of Big Beaver and west of Adams, in that corner there. And Adams Castle's in my backyard, or I'm in their side yard, I guess you'd say, by their garages. So I see that every day. And then across the street from me is a house built by Carl Strand in 1924. It's older than the castle even. And it's up on a hill right across the front of my house. And actually it's because I, kind of by chance, located there that I became interested in historic homes initially, 1975 when we moved here. So I've been here 50 years now, and been here longer than half my life, so I consider myself now a native of Bloomfield Township, although I grew up in Monroe.
Right, okay.
And I worked there, I lived there for 30 years while I worked for IBM. Well, excuse me, I'd already worked for IBM before. After 30 years with IBM, I retired, and the next day started with Ford for another 15 years, and then retired from them 2007 is when I retired from Ford.
Sounds good. So you're between these two historic homes.
Oh, yeah.
That sparks your interest.
Yep.
And then you said, well, where am I living? So townships have sections. So you were in section 24. That's Big Beaver and Adams area. So you decided to take a deeper dive into the section.
Yeah, that was, at first I didn't have much time to do local history. When you're raising two daughters who are athletes and you want to go watch all their sporting events and so forth, and even in college they played volleyball for the University of Michigan. So until they graduated and got out of the sports world, I spent most of my time following them around to their sporting events and doing what most young families do. But I did a little bit of dabbling in the history of the area because I was between those two houses. In 1991, the Neighborhood Association asked me if I could give a presentation about the history of the area that we live in. So I cobbled together something that I'd learned in my brief studying of the area, and did that in 1991. And
was that section 24 where you were?
Yeah, I was supposed to be about our neighborhood. It was only a tiny bit of section 24, but this really kind of covered what was in. Now, section 24, for those of you who don't know, is bounded by Adams Road on the east side, Big Beaver Road on the south side, and Waddles Road on the north side, and there's no boundary on the west side, because Woodward wanders off in northeasterly direction. It's a square mile, and it contains all kinds of interesting things that are in the township, like the Rouge River runs through it. The railroad, Grand Trunk Western Railroad, was located right through the middle of it in 1930. Other feature, there's a location of the so-called Mastodon discovery in 1934, in that little pond there on Waddles Road. And so I had a lot to write about, a lot to talk about in the square mile. So I was focusing on that up until about 1992 or 93 before I started branching out. Want to tell me how I branched out?
Tell us how you branched out. And I know you became aware of an interest in starting a local historical society too.
Yeah, let me back up a little bit on that. Let me see how I want to say this. In 1997, the mayor of Bloomfield Hills at the time, Davy, I think his name was, and Mark Quire, the then archivist at Cranbrook, decided they would try to start a Bloomfield Hills Historical Society, BHHS, Bloomfield Hills Historical Society. And they had publicize it in the eccentric newspaper. I saw the report they're going to have this interest meeting held at the City of Bloomfield Hills meeting room. And I went to that in 97. Then they had about 2 or 3 follow-up meetings. There were 59, 60 people that went to this. They were interested in being part of this historical society that was being supposedly developed for the Bloomfield Hills. And but it fizzled out, either because Davy became no longer the mayor or whatever. I'm not sure why it never got beyond the 3 or 4 initial meetings. But then it was in 2002, 1 or 2, that the library director at the time, Karen Catullus Carter, said she wanted to resurrect the idea of this historical society, but call it a Bloomfield Historical Society, and cover more than just the city of Bloomfield Hills. Pretty much anything in a township, except for Birmingham. We kind of keep our hands off of Birmingham because they got their own history stuff going on. But so she started off by having a couple of local history programs. In 2002, she had a first of what we call our local history, local resource series program. We didn't call it that back then. We just called it a local history program. But in actuality, it was the first of our series called Local History, Local Resources. And Homer Case, the longtime supervisor for the township, was the first person to speak and be presented his remembrance of growing up in Bloomfield. And then in January of 2003, I was the second speaker, and she wanted me to talk about house histories. So I didn't know what houses to talk about, but fortunately I didn't want to just talk about the 2 houses I lived between, and the others that I had found, the other 8 or 9 in my section 24. But I was fortunate enough, really fortunate, to discover about that same time, shortly before that, the the collection of material from Judson Bradway, the big-time developer in the Bloomfield area, developed a dozen subdivisions starting about 1915. And he had, there were albums of his work and so forth that were stored and are still stored in the office of the Bloomfield Village, his biggest subdivision. Right. And the director at the time was Charlie Wilson. And somehow I got in touch with him. I was going to gather information to begin to write a history of Bloomfield Town. I was pretty ambitious. I would write a whole history of Bloomfield Township. You'll see that it narrowed down to 1 section. Right. But he let me borrow these albums of information about it. And I found in there a map that became my guiding document for doing house histories. It's called the Bloomfield Trail, beautiful Bloomfield Trail, driving map and directions and so forth. And it was a 16-mile route through part of the township that identified about 60 different places, mostly homes, with little thumbnail-size pictures of many of them in it, and who owned it and so forth. So I took 12, that was a fascinating thing. I kept that. I've had it ever since. It's in the library now, I think, and available on our website.
And the Bloomfield Historical Society, we did a driving tour of that.
Yeah, well, we had, I finally took some people on it, but that was a long time afterwards. But I used 12 houses off of that map. And I did a little research on them, took some pictures of them, stuck by in a spy camera and took pictures of the outside of them, and presented those 12 houses and a little bit about the history of them. Most of my research is done on the people that lived in the houses, what the land was like before they built the house, and if they were in a subdivision, how the subdivision was formed, but not so much about the architecture of the home. I have a picture of the home. If I learn the architect's name, I will include that. But those are my first 12 and I presented it 22 years ago, in January 1923, as number 2 of our 65 local history, local resource programs.
Can you describe a little bit of how you do your detective work on these
Well,
items?
no, that takes a long time. I use most of the stuff I can access on my computer. And the township is really good. It has a lot of information on it. It has historic tax records. I can look at the perfect description of the house as it is today, who the owner is, and even what they paid for it and so forth. But to go backwards in time, I have to go through old tax records or even go up to the county sometimes and get the history of who owned the property over time. and that's a little bit of a tricky process. They have something called a tract index, which is available online, and I was able to use that for some of the work, but that only carries it to the point where a house is not part of a subdivision. Once it becomes part of a subdivision, that particular file goes away. I use census data from ancestry.com to look at if I find a person that lived there, I look at who their children were. I try to find over time who lived there. I use there's a city directories are on ancestry.com, so I can find using the city directory things like that. There are a number. I have a whole presentation on doing it. In fact, there's a presentation coming up, I think, with Carol Egbo, is where she's going to talk about doing house histories.
Right.
As part of the local history, local resource series in April.
It's coming up in April, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a longer process than what I described, but there are many online tools that I can use to do it, many of which I've captured on my own computer.
And that led you to a better understanding of some of the residents there, which were prominent in Detroit area business.
Well,
Correct.
only by chance. I would, if I found out that one of these, and most of the homes I focused on were earlier homes built, most of them in the 20s. There's a huge building period right before the Depression, and a little bit of it afterwards. They built a lot of homes here in the 20s. Like the castle was built in 27. The house across the street from me was built in 1924. And there were dozens of houses built in Bloomfield Township area, many of them by business executives, for business executives and so forth. And so that way I became acquainted with the names of people I really didn't know much about before, but I would include them in my little chronology of who owned the house and so forth, and in the process learned a bit about what their business were and so forth.
Right, and so many of the history of those homes are on our website.
Well,
for History Next Door.
Yeah. Well, that's another project I got engaged with here through Bloomfield Community Television, actually. Greg Kowalski, the former director here, asked me 4 or 5 years ago to do a little 400-word piece on one of the houses that was being restored that was right across from the Bloomfield Hills City Hall. That's called, named Bowers lived there. Built in 1930, I think. Now it's a little office building. So I had seen some work I had done on it. He said, why don't you put that into a write-up for our newsletter, electronic newsletter that comes out for the township. And oh, by the way, why don't you give a little 6 or 7 minute video that people can go to look at other images of it, more information than what you get in a 400-word essay. So I did that one, and that led to 50 of them. I did 50 of those different ones that I thought were of interest in the area, and called it History Next Door, and did those all on Bloomfield Community Television, usually a couple weeks apart. And then I decided I would turn that into a book. Take the work that I had done, maybe enhance some of the text a bit, and put it into something that would go in the library as actually going to be it's a hardcover book with these pages about my local history for 50 homes. But really I've done histories on over 200 homes. And my files for those, my file folders with information, which includes these 50 homes that we talked about, all these 200 homes are in the archives of the Bloomfield Township Public Library, Local History Archives. And if you have a house you're interested in, you can have that file, you can have access to that file by going through the Adult Services reference desk, and they can pull that file, and a lot of it's just miscellaneous notes that I made and so forth. It's not particularly well organized, but I don't ever throw anything away, so I put it all in these folders. And I did 200 of them, basically.
Yeah, that's quite a few.
Yeah.
And between our website and the library, there's a lot of information.
Well, yeah, I've got this History Next Door. You've got my Century Homes work that we did back in 2006.
Yeah.
In 2006, the township, one of our board members, worked at the township, and she gave us a list of homes. Actually, it was Homer Case's daughter-in-law, Joan Case. She was a member of Bloomfield Historical Society back then. In 2006, so she pulled a list of all the homes that were built before 2006. We had about 40 homes, built before 1906, excuse me. And so we had about 40 homes that were really old homes that we did a little research on and put them together in a book that's also on the shelves and online at the library and the library website.
Yeah, and on that one you collaborated with Lainey Tobin.
Lainey Tobin was
right?
Was my helper, and she did a lot of the detailed work. We kind of we'd work together on it, but she did a lot of the nice organizing of it. Lainey was at the time a member of the board of Bloomfield Historical Society.
Right, and she was the daughter of Claire Ditchie.
Well, yeah, Claire Ditchie was a fairly prominent architect in the 20s.
Right.
Her father, and several of his homes are included in the work that I did too.
Yeah. So in the mid-2000s, a group of history lovers continued to grow and interact, and there was concern about two historic homes that were in danger of being demolished, the Benjamin Barton House and the Craig Log Cabin.
Yeah, let me tell you how we got involved in that.
Yeah.
This was before Preservation Bloomfield ever existed. The Historical Society existed starting about 2003. That's when the official charter was developed as a 501c3 charitable donation organization. But in 2005, I got a call from a friend of mine that was on the Oakland County Pioneer and Historical Society, Charlie Martinez, and he had heard and he wanted us to know about the fact that the log cabin on Lone Pine Road, just east of Franklin, had been sold to a developer whose plan was to demolish it and build a new home there. And we got involved quickly with that developer and with the township, because of Bloomfield Preservation. Bloomfield did not exist at the time, and was able to get the developer to donate for a small amount of money if we would take it away to the cabin, log cabin, get it off the property. So there was work going on that, and about a year later, during the 75th anniversary preparation for the city of Bloomfield Hills, Pat Hardy, with the help of Harry Walsh, my mentor in local history, since deceased, he showed Pat a house in Bloomfield, the oldest home in city of Bloomfield Hills, he thought, on Long Lake Road near the Hunt Club and Eastways Road. And it had been a property of several owners, but it was most recently the property of Carl Barton's family. The Barton family had owned it for 60 years or so. It was an old farmhouse originally that had been renovated and upgraded and added to and so forth, but still had the bones of the heart of the old farmhouse in it. And Pat got really enthusiastic about connected with his 75th anniversary work she was doing, the anniversary of the city of Bloomfield Hills, decided to try to promote organize a group that would work together to save this house. So we had work going on trying to save the cabin with the township helping and the historical society. And we had this city of Bloomfield Hills mayor who wanted to save the oldest house in the city of Bloomfield Hills, which we now call the Benjamin Barton House. Because the Benjamin family built it in 1840 or something, thereabouts. And so to save that one, we didn't do it through the Historical Society. We did it through a new group that was formed called the Preservation Bloomfield. Preservation Bloomfield is made up of 4 organizations: City of Bloomfield Hills, Bloomfield Township, Bloomfield Hills Schools, and the Bloomfield Historical Society. Now, a lot of people get the two mixed up. They think the Bloomfield Historical Society is the same as Preservation Bloomfield,
Right,
but
right.
not true. Not so. Historical Society is a participant in the Preservation Bloomfield, which is basically responsible for the saving of the log cabin and the Benjamin Barton farmhouse. And enough money was raised for the Barton farmhouse to move it in August of 2008, I think it was, July or August, from where it was located at Long Lake and Eastways, drug it up the highway by a moving company and put it on the property of the Bowers School farm. And a month later, took the cabin and got involved in the township getting the Preservation Bloomfield to participate, and actually ended up taking over ownership of the cabin and moved it 30 days after the house was moved, also to the Bowers School farm. So both these buildings sit right along Square Lake Road, very close to each other, and are both supported now mainly by Preservation Bloomfield, with Bloomfield Historical Society being one of the 4 organizations that participates in it.
Right, and lots of volunteer help with the maintenance and
All
care of the
volunteer,
homes.
no tax dollars at all going into either of those
That's
projects.
right. So during this time, you're continuing to do research and things like that and connect with the community. And I've been involved for about 17 years. And inevitably, when I'm talking with someone who's maybe new to the group or wants to get involved, when I ask, how did you hear about us? John Marshall's name always comes up. Well, I talked to John Marshall and this and that, or I asked him a question about something.
Yeah.
And
One of my favorite things is when people ask me about a home that I have not researched before. Then I got something to work on. I've run out of ideas of my own,
Right.
But if somebody comes forth and has a home that I think is of interest, that I have not done digging on, I'll do some research on it for them. That's how I got to the 200 homes that I had researched. My homes were all originally off of this Judson Bradway driving map, that many of which are still in existence today. And then I got involved in other things that people could see me on, like the Bloomfield Community Television History Next Door series, writing articles for the Legacy newsletter, which is the newsletter of the Bloomfield Historical Society, and making presentations. I've made several of the local resource presentations, either by myself or working with others. So I got to be known for that kind of thing, and I often get direct questions either directly or through the Historical Society.
right, I usually check the emails for the Historical Society, and 9 times out of 10, I'm sending those questions right to you, and John gets back on those right away.
You
So
filter them
that's-
out for
I
you.
filter them a little bit. You've been involved in so many areas of our local history, but I know you have a few favorites.
Oh, yeah.
Things that you've did. If you want to talk about those, whether it's the
Well,
afterglow or the bird's eye view
Yeah,
map and a
yeah.
few other things.
Well, I mean, and these aren't all things that I did, but they were I've done in collaboration with some experts like Larry Trinkus and Carol DeWeese from Birmingham. The first one we got involved with was taking a magazine called The Afterglow, which was published for only 3 months about suburban living in the Bloomfield area. And I found a few copies of that by chance in the Baldwin Library, but it was not a complete set. It was a partial set of magazine. It was a monthly magazine. It started in 1925. But I learned that the Burton Historical Society in Detroit, in the Detroit Public Library, had a 3-volume set that was bound of all of these magazines that came out for a total of about 1,000 pages. And I was able to talk them into letting me take that from the Burton Historical Collection, bring it up to a studio that my friend Carol DeWeese from Birmingham had, and we photographed in high resolution every one of the pages of those books, of the Afterglow magazine, and made it available on the website, both the library website and the Historical Society website. So I didn't do much except con the Burton Historical Society out of
So to speak.
letting us take the books out for a couple of weeks and photograph them. And then I turned the pages for Carroll as he took the pictures. And then we made a presentation on it at the Historical Society and that. The next most interesting one was there's a map that hangs in a wall in these, and some of you may have seen it, kind of about a 4 foot by 6 foot watercolor painted map, bird's eye view we call it, because it's like a perspective of the township looking from like an airplane, but it wasn't from an airplane or a hot air. It looks down from just about Birmingham area out over the township. All little houses are in it, all little terrain is shown in the way they did the coloring with the painting and such. And that hangs on the wall of in the auditorium, if you will, of the township. It was donated by Judson Bradway, another good thing he did. He had it in his office years ago when he was running a business here trying to sell property. So with Larry's expertise, Larry Trinkus's expertise, I helped him. I was his leg man for doing things that he photographed that in 9 different panels, I think it was, and was able to blend them together. Did a beautiful digital copy, better than the original actually. It's available online at the Historical Society's website.
Right, yeah.
And you can zoom in real close and you can count the windows in a house if the artist put them on them. And it's really quite accurate, I think, for what was there in 1915.
And the artist allegedly drove around in a Model T.
No, I don't even probably a horse-drawn, I don't know, whatever he had.
Or horse-drawn carriage, but...
I don't know, we could go into that in some detail, but I think he had to draw a sketch of the township, first of all the crossroads, and then he went out and looked for stuff to go back to the office, put them on his map, and go back day after day and build up this map of things that he could see.
It really is incredible, yeah, and very high resolution on our website.
Yeah, so. It's a beautiful, beautiful rendition. And somewhat related, the same year, 1915, is a mural, a long, 83-foot long mural. It goes around the ceiling, not the ceiling, but the walls up near the ceiling, about 18 inches wide, painted mural of images that were captured on a trip from Dearborn to San Francisco, made by Etzel Ford as a young man, and his friend Frank Book, and a couple, 4 or 5 of their more friends, using some of the vehicles that existed in 1915. They drove cross country to a exposition in San Francisco, and photographs were taken along the way. And afterwards, Frank Book had some of these pictures turned into a mural, a band around his ceiling in his room, kind of get another color painted mural of the different scenes. And again, Larry, with his tools and expertise, we photographed that and put that on our website so people can see inside this house. It's a home off on Wing Lake Road.
The home is still there?
The home is still there.
Yeah,
it's a private home. But they, again, were gracious enough to let us go in and set up Larry's equipment, and I would help him measure things and so forth.
Right.
We were able to get it digitized in another very high resolution way. That was a fun project.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned a few times the Four Corners project.
Well, that's a little bit off, a one-off type of thing. I got a call from the historian in Waterford, in West Bloomfield, who lives in Sylvan Lake, and she was
Helen Jane Peters? Helen Jane?
Helen Jane Peters, yeah. And she thought that the intersection of Bloomfield Township, West Bloomfield Township, Waterford Township, and Pontiac Township was somewhere in Sylvan Lake community. So we did research on that, and we actually found through old maps and surveyor records and so forth actually got surveyor data from the archives of Michigan, and showed how they surveyed in 1817, and they would mark the corners of the townships with a special stake, and there was a stake that marked the corner where those four townships met, and we could pinpoint exactly whose yard that was in, and just inside the boundary of the city of Sylvan Lake, and we had a plaque built much like these different informational plaques you see around on historic sites, and put that out on the road near it so people can see, well, there's where the four corners are. And then had a presentation on it. It was a fun project. I learned a lot about surveying in that project. We had to read a lot of surveyor notes and look at old maps and things. So I collaborated with her on that. It was more of a West Bloomfield project.
Okay.
But we take credit for participating.
Right. And I think another one you mentioned is the 1818 expedition.
Yeah, that was also a collaboration with many other people. After the 1817 survey was done of the townships, finally got surveyed officially into the various townships and things in 1817. There'd been a reputation of this area, anything north of Detroit was just a big swampy, uninhabitable area, because everything around just north of Detroit was. It was in the Royal Oak area and such. It was quite low and not very well suited for agriculture. But a group of businessmen in 1818, the year after the surveyors came back with maps of the area, decided they would take a trip away, an adventure up into the area, and follow a route through it and see what they thought of the livability of the property and the land up there and so forth. And they published their trip in an article in the Detroit Free Press, I think it was in October or November 1818, describing where they went. So several people that I worked with, mainly it was from both the Historical Society and Oakland County Pioneer and West Bloomfield and such, we got together and produced a presentation about this expedition of businessmen from Detroit that had gone up and gone through the area around Wing Lake and Cass Lake and up into Pontiac, and we marked the route that they followed and documented things that they saw and made a presentation about their journey they took in 1818. That was kind of a fun project too, because it tied in with the 1817 survey information that I'd already become aware of. So that was one of the local history program presentations also.
Fantastic. I would assume you've really enjoyed all this work you've done.
I wouldn't have done it if I didn't.
You have a great passion for it, and I think the community is so much better off.
I should have been doing history of Monroe, but where I grew up as a kid, but I didn't live there long enough.
Well, you can do that next. I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Well, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I missed.
There is a lot.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, I could talk about my high school athletic career and then what I did at the University of Michigan. That's all not germane.
John was a track star. You held your school record for the quarter mile, right?
Well,
for a while.
For a while until my brother beat it.
That's right.
My scrawny little brother.
Because you encouraged him to give it a try.
Well, he was the year that I set the record. He was just our I call him water boy, the guy that helped the team. Team manager. But the next year he said, he's going to go out for track. So he went out for track and he ran it faster than I did.
Oh, well.
That's proud of him.
You kept it in the family, so that's good. And you were into bicycling too, and didn't you come up with the bicycling route through Bloomfield, a little history tour by bicycle?
Well, I did a lot of bicycling when I was still able to do it. I can't do it now, but back in the time I did a lot of riding, like Dave. Not as much as Dave does. Dave does a lot more than I did. But one of the things I'd like to do is ride my bike around the township. Mainly I'd follow this Judson Bradway map too, looking at these homes and other stuff. But I decided, there was a guy from Oakland University who had written up in the newspaper, I don't know how many years ago, who would ride his bike from Beverly Hills area, south of us, up to Oakland University to be a professor, to do his professorial work, and then ride it back home. And he went a route that came up from, eventually came up Charing Cross Road over to Kensington, up Kensington Road through past the Hunt Club and on up, eventually getting to Updike Road and up Updike Road to Oakland University. So I took part of that route that he followed, and I documented things that one would see if they rode their bicycle and what historic areas you would go through taking that route into the township. And it's I think some of that information is somewhere on the website. I'm not sure.
I think it is, and it's.
But it was just a certain route that a guy that I read about followed, and I did it and made notes for myself along the way of what we were passing through, what had been there before.
Yeah, that's great stuff, and it's a great way to get some exercise and check out our local history. So.
Yeah. And anything else do you remember me talking about that I forgot?
I think that's about it. I would encourage people to look at our website because so much of your work that you've done is on our website.
And a lot of it is also on the Township Library website, but most of it's really available best on the Bloomfield Historical Society website.
Right.
Tell them what that is again, Dave.
It's BloomfieldHistoricalSociety.org is the name of the website.
That's all I spelled all out, BloomfieldHistoricalSociety.org.
There's a lot of pictures of the Craig Log Cabin. That's where John and I have spent most of the time together working on the cabin with Larry Trinkus and Brian Keeps and Dave Baumhart, the five Daubers.
Yeah, well, we can go. That could take a long time to present all that too. But.
That's a whole other subject. We'll have to have some follow-up interviews to this one. But this is a good introduction to all the work that John Marshall has done. On behalf of the community, I just want to thank you for everything you've done, because it really is remarkable.
Well, it made my life very enjoyable, particularly after I retired. It gave me something to do that I thought I was contributing to, and I enjoyed doing. So that was a nice retirement hobby for me.
Yeah, and it's brought so many people together with a common interest in history, and I've found that I like people that like history.
Yeah, I'm not sure I brought them together. I just joined the people that are already there. But anyway.
Everybody knows who John Marshall is, that's for sure. So anyway, thank you very much, John. Really appreciate it. And
well, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for watching, and look for our next oral history interview coming up sometime soon. Thank you very much.